Maria Vasquez never imagined that failing Navy SEAL training would be the very thing that qualified her to save a four-star admiral's life with a single impossible shot. But sometimes the people everyone writes off are exactly the ones the world needs most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Pacific Ocean spray hit Maria's face as the transport boat cut through the choppy waters toward Naval Special Warfare Training Center at Point Mugu. She gripped her weathered sea bag tighter, feeling the familiar weight of her diving gear and the tactical equipment she'd accumulated over 8 years as a Navy E-aid specialist. Around her, 23 other candidates sat in focused silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. But Maria was different from the others, and she knew it. While most of these men were fresh from basic SEAL preparation courses, barely old enough to legally drink, she was 31 years old with more underwater demolitions experience than half the instructors. She'd spent the better part of a decade defusing bombs in harbors from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, working in conditions that would make most people panic. Yet here she was, starting over as a SEAL candidate, trying to prove herself all over again. The training center emerged from the morning fog like something out of a military recruitment video. Concrete buildings spread across the coastline, connected by obstacle courses that looked like medieval torture devices. The infamous SEAL training bell stood prominently near the main building, polished to a mirror shine by the countless hands of candidates who'd run it to quit. Maria had promised herself that bell would never feel her touch. "Holy shit, look at this place," muttered the candidate next to her, a young Marine named Jackson whose muscles bulged beneath his fresh-pressed utilities. "This is where legends are made." Maria said nothing, but she studied the facility with the analytical eye of someone who'd spent years assessing dangerous environments. The obstacle courses were designed to break people mentally as much as physically. The instructors visible on the beach moved with the predatory confidence of apex predators. This wasn't just training. It was systematic elimination. As the boat docked, Master Chief Luis Santos stepped onto the pier. Even at 50-something, he moved like a man half his age, his weathered face showing the kind of calm that came from surviving things most people couldn't imagine. His voice carried clearly over the engine noise and ocean wind. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Point Mugu. For the next 6 months, this will be your home, your hell, and hopefully your transformation. Most of you won't be here in 2 weeks. That's not a threat, it's a statistical reality." The candidates filed off the boat in alphabetical order. Maria found herself in the middle of the pack, which suited her fine. She'd learned long ago that the best way to assess a new situation was to observe first and act second. As they formed up on the pier, she got her first good look at her competition. Derek "Shark" Thompson stood out immediately. Tall, broad-shouldered, and carrying himself with the swagger of someone who'd never encountered a challenge he couldn't dominate. He looked like he'd been designed in a laboratory to become a Navy SEAL. His gear was brand new, top of the line, and perfectly organized. Within minutes of arrival, he'd already started gathering a group of admirers around him. 6-minute mile, 150 push-ups, and I can hold my breath for 4 minutes, Derek was telling anyone who'd listen. "My dad's a SEAL, my brother's a SEAL, and I've been preparing for this my whole life." Other candidates clustered around Derek like satellites around a planet. There was Mitchell, a former college swimmer with Olympic trial times. Barnes, a Army Ranger who'd transferred specifically to join the SEALs. Williams, whose father was a Medal of Honor recipient. Each one had credentials that read like a recruiting poster. Then there was Maria, standing slightly apart from the group, her EOD experience apparently less impressive than Derek's genetic legacy or Mitchell's swim times. She'd made the mistake of mentioning her background during introductions, only to watch eyes glaze over when she explained explosive ordnance disposal. EOD, huh? Derek had said with a dismissive grin. That's like being a really specialized mechanic, right? Must be nice to work at your own pace underwater. SEAL operations are a little more dynamic. Maria had simply nodded, but made a mental note. Derek Thompson was going to be a problem, not because he was skilled, though he clearly was, but because he'd already decided who belonged and who didn't. And in his mind, the 31-year-old EOD tech with the worn gear and quiet demeanor definitely didn't belong. Master Chief Santos began his welcome speech, but Maria found herself studying the training environment instead. The obstacle courses were positioned to take advantage of natural wind patterns that would affect performance. The swimming areas had subtle current variations that could trip up candidates who relied purely on pool training. The shooting ranges were angled to create challenging light conditions at different times of day. Most importantly, she noticed something the other candidates had missed. Every element of the facility was designed to reward not just physical performance, but problem-solving under pressure. The SEAL teams weren't just looking for athletes. They were looking for warriors who could think clearly when everything was going wrong. Vasquez. Master Chief Santos's voice cut through her analysis. You still with us? Yes, Master Chief, Maria replied, snapping to attention. Good, because I was explaining that SEAL training isn't just about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about being the smartest under pressure. Physical abilities will get you in the door, but tactical thinking will keep you alive in the field. His eyes seemed to linger on Maria for a moment longer than the others, and she wondered if he'd noticed her studying the facility. Either way, his words had clearly registered with her while some of the other candidates were still flexing and posturing. As they were assigned barracks and began the administrative processing, Maria found herself bunking near Derek's growing circle of followers. The conversation she overheard confirmed her initial assessment. These were athletes treating SEAL training like an extended fitness competition, confident that their physical abilities would carry them through. The thing is, Derek was explaining to his audience, SEALs operate fast and hard. You've got to be able to go from zero to lethal in seconds. There's no time for overthinking or hesitation. Maria unpacked her gear methodically, each item placed with the precision of someone who'd learned that organization could mean the difference between life and death. Her equipment might be older and less flashy, but every piece had been tested in real-world conditions. Her diving knife had cut through actual mines. Her tactical vest had absorbed shrapnel from real explosions. Her gear told stories that Derek's pristine equipment never could. That evening, during the first formal briefing, Commander Nathan Cross laid out the training philosophy that would govern the next 6 months. Cross was a legend in the SEAL community, a man whose quiet intensity made even Derek shut up and listen. SEAL teams operate in the most challenging environments on Earth. Cross began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been there. Underwater infiltrations, desert operations, Arctic conditions, urban warfare. We need operators who can adapt to any situation, not specialists who excel in one area. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled candidates. Physical fitness is the baseline. Mental toughness is the standard. But tactical intelligence, the ability to make the right decision under extreme pressure, that's what separates SEALs from everyone else. Maria felt a spark of hope. This wasn't just about being the fastest swimmer or the strongest runner. This was about being smart enough to succeed when others failed. As the briefing concluded and candidates began filing out, Maria overheard Derek talking to his group again. All that tactical intelligence stuff sounds good, he said with a dismissive laugh, but at the end of the day, it comes down to who's toughest. And I didn't come here to think my way through problems. I came here to dominate them. Maria said nothing, but she made another mental note. Derek Thompson wasn't just confident. He was overconfident. And in her experience, overconfidence was often the first step toward failure. As she settled into her bunk that first night, Maria could hear the ocean waves crashing against the shore outside. Tomorrow would bring the first real tests, the initial challenges that would begin separating those who belonged from those who didn't. But Maria Vasquez had spent 8 years in situations where one wrong move meant death. She'd learned patience from defusing bombs, precision from working underwater, and mental toughness from facing real dangers that made training exercises look like games. She had no way of knowing that in just a few months, those very qualities that made her different from Derek and his followers would be exactly what a four-star admiral needed to survive. But first, she had to survive being the outsider in a world that rewarded conformity above all else. The alarm shrieked at 0430 hours, cutting through the barracks like a knife. Maria was already awake, having learned years ago that being ready before you needed to be was often the difference between success and failure. Around her, candidates stumbled out of their bunks, some clearly struggling with the early wake-up call. Derek Thompson, however, bounded up like he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. "Rise and shine, ladies," he called out, his voice carrying the artificial enthusiasm of someone performing for an audience. Time to separate the wheat from the chaff. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maria pulled on her PT gear methodically, watching as some candidates rushed through their preparations while others moved with practiced efficiency. The first few minutes of each day often revealed more about a person's character than hours of conversation. Derek was already doing push-ups beside his perfectly made bunk, drawing attention from nearby candidates who were still trying to find their socks. "Vasquez," called Jackson, the young Marine who'd sat next to her on the boat. "You ready for this?" "As ready as anyone can be," Maria replied, lacing her boots with the same precision she'd used to prepare for a dive on an unexploded mine. "How about you?" Jackson grinned nervously. "Derek's been telling us about his training regimen. Apparently his dad put him through a modified SEAL workout since he was 12. Says he's been preparing for this his whole life." Maria nodded but said nothing. She'd met plenty of people who'd been preparing their whole lives for something, only to discover that preparation for an idea was very different from preparation for reality. The candidates assembled on the beach as the sun began to rise over the Pacific. Master Chief Santos stood waiting, flanked by 3 other instructors whose names Maria had memorized from her pre-arrival research. These weren't just trainers. They were combat veterans who'd earned their positions through actions that would never make it into official reports. "Good morning, candidates," Santos called out, his voice carrying easily over the sound of waves. "Today we begin your education in what it means to be a Navy SEAL. Some of you think you know what that means. You're wrong." He gestured toward the obstacle course that stretched along the beach. "This isn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It's about being effective under pressure. SEAL operations don't come with second-place trophies. You succeed or people die." The first exercise was a timed beach run, followed by an obstacle course. Simple enough in concept, but Maria could see the subtle complexities built into the design. The sand was deliberately inconsistent, soft in some areas and packed hard in others. The obstacles were positioned to challenge different muscle groups in rapid succession. Most importantly, the course was designed to force candidates to make quick decisions about technique and pacing. Derek lined up at the front of the formation, bouncing on his toes like a sprinter preparing for the Olympics. "Time to show them how it's done," he muttered to Mitchell, who stood beside him looking equally confident. Maria positioned herself in the middle of the pack, ignoring Derek's theatrical warm-up routine. She'd studied the course layout during the briefing and identified 3 key decision points where technique would matter more than raw speed. Her EOD experience had taught her that rushing through complex procedures was often the fastest way to fail catastrophically. "Begin," Santos shouted. Derek exploded from the starting line like he'd been shot from a cannon, his powerful stride eating up the beach. Behind him, Mitchell and several other candidates followed, creating a lead pack that opened an early gap on the rest of the field. Maria settled into a steady pace, watching the leaders attack the first obstacle with brute force and athletic ability. The log carry looked straightforward. Move a 200-pound log 50 yards through soft sand. Derek and his group grabbed their log and charged forward, muscles straining against the weight. They made good time, but Maria noticed something they missed. The soft sand was deeper in the direct path they'd chosen, and their aggressive pace was causing them to sink with each step. When Maria's group reached the log, she called out quietly, angle left toward the harder sand. Her teammates looked skeptical but followed her suggestion. They moved slightly slower than Derek's group initially, but maintained their pace while the leaders began to struggle in the deeper sand. The rope climb, separating the beach run from the final obstacles, revealed even more. Derek attacked it with pure upper body strength, powering up the rope with impressive speed. But Maria could see his technique was inefficient, burning energy he'd need for the remaining challenges. When her turn came, she used a foot and leg technique she'd perfected during EOD training, climbing with less drama but greater efficiency. Look at that, she heard one of Derek's followers say as she descended the rope. The old lady knows some tricks, old lady. At 31, Maria filed the comment away but didn't respond. She'd learned long ago that defending yourself against ignorance was often a waste of energy better spent on more important things. The final obstacle was a simulated shipboarding, climbing over a wall using a rope while carrying a 40-pound pack. Derek's group reached it first, but their earlier energy expenditure was starting to show. Derek himself was breathing hard, his movements less fluid than they'd been at the start. Maria approached the wall with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. She'd climbed onto more ships and oil platforms than anyone in the candidate group, often while carrying much more than 40 pounds of equipment. The wall was just another obstacle to overcome efficiently. As she reached the top, she noticed Derek struggling to pull himself over while maintaining his grip on the pack. His impressive start was turning into a labored finish, but his supporters were still cheering him on as if he were winning decisively. When the final times were announced, Derek had finished third overall, an impressive result that his group celebrated like a victory. Maria had finished seventh, a solid performance that earned no particular attention. But she'd completed the course without the dramatic energy expenditure that had left several top finishers looking like they'd barely survived. Not bad for a warm-up, Derek announced to his growing audience during the post-exercise break. Tomorrow we start the real challenges. Hope everyone's ready to step up their game. Maria was cleaning sand from her gear when Mitchell approached her. Hey, good job out there. That thing about angling toward harder sand, how'd you know that? Experience. Maria replied simply. You spend enough time working in different environments, you learn to read conditions. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. Derek says experience doesn't matter much here. Says it's all about raw ability and mental toughness. Derek might be right, Maria said diplomatically, though privately she thought Derek was exactly wrong. Raw ability without experience was like a powerful engine without a steering wheel. Impressive until you needed to go somewhere specific. That evening, during equipment maintenance, the social dynamics of the candidate group became even clearer. Derek held court near his bunk, surrounded by candidates who hung on his every word about SEAL operations, training techniques, and the importance of aggressive leadership. The thing you've got to understand, Derek was explaining, is that SEALs don't have time for overthinking. When the shooting starts, you react on instinct and training. All that tactical analysis stuff sounds good in briefings, but in the field, it's about who can move fastest and hit hardest. Maria listened while cleaning her gear, noting how Derek's philosophy seemed to boil down to speed and aggression over everything else. It was an approach that might work well in training exercises with predictable parameters, but she'd seen what happened when speed and aggression met real-world complexity. Usually, it didn't end well. "What do you think, Vasquez?" Derek called out, apparently noticing her attention. "You've got some field experience, right? EOD work?" The question felt like a test, with 24 candidates suddenly focused on her response. Maria considered her words carefully. "EOD taught me that every situation is different," she said finally. "What works in one scenario might get you killed in another. The key is adapting your approach to match the reality you're facing." Derek grinned, but it wasn't friendly. "See, that's the difference between support roles and combat roles. Support people have time to think and analyze. Combat operators have to act. Hesitation kills more people than mistakes." Several candidates nodded in agreement, and Maria realized she'd just been classified as a support person in Derek's worldview. Not a real warrior, just someone who fixed things for the people who did the actual fighting. "Fair enough," Maria replied, returning to her gear maintenance. There was no point in arguing with Derek's philosophy, especially since he clearly had the support of most of the candidate group. Time would reveal which approach worked better when the pressure increased. As lights out approached, Maria reflected on the day's lessons. Derek Thompson was everything the SEAL program seemed to want: athletic, aggressive, confident, and charismatic. He'd probably excel in many of the upcoming challenges, especially those that rewarded raw physical ability and competitive drive. But Maria had also noticed things that Derek's supporters had missed. His technique was wasteful of energy. His decision-making prioritized appearance over efficiency. Most importantly, his confidence seemed to be based on the assumption that every challenge would play to his strengths. In Maria's experience, real-world operations had a way of not caring about your strengths. They presented whatever challenges they presented, and you either adapted or failed. The question was whether SEAL training would test that kind of adaptability, or whether it would continue to reward the kind of straightforward athletic performance that Derek excelled at. Outside, the Pacific Ocean continued its endless rhythm against the shore, indifferent to the ambitions and anxieties of the candidates settling into their bunks. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and new opportunities for both success and failure. Maria closed her eyes, knowing she'd need every hour of rest she could get. The real test of Derek's philosophy versus her own was just beginning. Week 2 brought the underwater challenges that separated SEAL candidates from everyone else in the military. The Pacific Ocean off Point Mugu was unforgiving, cold, murky, and filled with currents that could disorient even experienced swimmers. For most candidates, this would be their first real test of operating in the SEAL's natural element. Maria stood on the dock at 0500, watching the sun paint the horizon in shades of orange and pink. The water looked deceptively calm from the surface, but she could read the subtle signs that indicated strong underwater currents and limited visibility. 8 years of EOD work had taught her to respect the ocean's power while learning to work within its constraints. Derek bounced on his toes nearby, his enthusiasm undimmed by the early hour or the challenging conditions. "Finally some real SEAL training," he announced to his usual audience. "This is where we separate the sharks from the minnows." The morning's evolution was Pool Comp, a series of underwater exercises designed to test candidates' comfort and competence in aquatic environments. Master Chief Santos stood at the pool's edge, his weathered face showing the kind of calm that came from decades of underwater operations. "Gentlemen and lady," Santos began, his voice cutting through the morning air, "the ocean doesn't care about your college swimming records or your gym achievements. Water is a different environment with different rules. Some of you will discover you're not as comfortable underwater as you thought." The first exercise seemed simple: swim 50 meters underwater without surfacing. No time limit, no competition, Just a basic test of breath control and underwater movement. Derek volunteered to go first, naturally, and approached the pool with his characteristic swagger. "Watch and learn," he told Mitchell, then dove in with a splash that sent water across the deck. Derek's underwater technique was powerful but inefficient. He moved like he was trying to set a speed record, burning through his oxygen reserves with unnecessary muscle tension and aggressive movements. Maria watched through the pool's viewing window as Derek's initial confidence gradually gave way to visible strain. Halfway through the swim, Derek's technique began to deteriorate. His movements became jerky, his rhythm irregular. By the 40-meter mark, he was clearly struggling, fighting the urge to surface rather than working with his body's natural buoyancy and rhythm. Derek surfaced at 47 meters, gasping for air and trying to mask his disappointment. "Current's stronger than I expected," he muttered. Though the pool had no current at all. Several other candidates followed with similar results. Athletic swimmers who discovered that pool training hadn't prepared them for the mental discipline required for extended underwater work. When Maria's turn came, she approached the pool edge with the same methodical preparation she brought to every task. Before entering the water, Maria spent 30 seconds controlling her breathing, slowing her heart rate, and visualizing the swim ahead. It was a technique she'd learned during EOD training, where panic underwater could mean death for both her and anyone depending on her work. Her entry was clean and quiet, barely disturbing the water's surface. Underwater, Maria moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years working in conditions where every movement had to be deliberate and controlled. She maintained a steady rhythm, keeping her muscles relaxed and her mind focused on the task rather than the distance remaining. At the halfway point, where Derek had begun to struggle, Maria felt the familiar calm that came from being in her element. The underwater world was peaceful, predictable, governed by physics rather than politics or personalities. Here, experience and technique mattered more than bravado and athletic ability. Maria surfaced at 52 meters, having overshot the target slightly. Her breathing was controlled, her movements still fluid. She'd completed the exercise not just successfully, but with a calm efficiency that several instructors noticed. "Outstanding technique, Vasquez," said Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, one of the dive instructors. "EOD background?" "Yes, Petty Officer," Maria replied, pulling herself from the pool. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "It shows. That's how you work underwater when lives depend on it." Derek's group watched this exchange with visible surprise. The woman they'd dismissed as too old and too cautious had just outperformed their golden boy in his supposed area of strength. But Derek quickly regained his composure, ready with an explanation. "Different skill sets," he announced to his followers. "EOD work is about being slow and methodical. SEAL operations require speed and aggression, even underwater." The next evolution put Derek's theory to the test. Underwater knot tying while breath holding. Candidates had to dive to the bottom of the 12-foot pool, tie 3 specific knots in sequence, then surface. The exercise simulated the kind of precise underwater work SEALs might need to perform during shipboarding or demolitions operations. Derek approached this challenge with the same aggressive energy he brought to everything else. He hyperventilated briefly to load his blood with oxygen, then dove to the bottom with powerful strokes. But once he reached the bottom and began working with the rope, his approach ran into problems. Knot tying underwater required fine motor control and steady breathing, exactly the opposite of Derek's power-based approach. Maria watched through the viewing window as Derek struggled with the first knot, his movements becoming increasingly frantic as his oxygen reserves dwindled. He managed to complete only 1 knot before being forced to surface. "Fucking rope was defective," Derek muttered as he climbed out. Though the rope was standard Navy issue that dozens of candidates had used successfully, when Maria's turn came, She approached the exercise with the same preparation she'd use for defusing an underwater mine. She controlled her breathing, visualized each knot sequence, and entered the water with minimal splash. At the bottom of the pool, she worked with the patient precision of someone who'd performed similar tasks in zero visibility, with lives hanging in the balance. Each knot was tied with deliberate movements, muscle memory guiding her fingers while her mind monitored her oxygen levels and body position. She completed all 3 knots with time to spare, surfacing with the same controlled breathing she'd maintained throughout the exercise. "Textbook execution," Rodriguez commented as Maria climbed out. "That's how underwater work gets done in the real world." The pattern continued through the morning's exercises. Derek excelled at the swimming events that rewarded pure athletic ability, freestyle sprints and surface endurance swims. But every exercise that required precision, patience, or fine motor control underwater revealed the limitations of his aggressive approach. Maria, meanwhile, demonstrated a level of underwater competence that impressed even the instructors. Her movements were economical, her technique was flawless, and her mental state remained calm regardless of the challenge's complexity. During the lunch break, the social dynamics of the candidate group began to shift slightly. Jackson approached Maria as she was reviewing her gear. "That underwater knot tying was incredible," he said quietly. "I barely managed 1 knot, and you made it look easy." "It's just practice," Maria replied. "You spend enough time underwater, you learn to work efficiently." Derek's saying the exercises are rigged towards support specialties, Jackson continued, glancing toward Derek's group. "That real SEAL work is different." Maria considered her response carefully. "Every specialty has something to teach. The question is whether you're willing to learn from it." That afternoon brought the culminating event, a simulated shipboarding exercise in open ocean. Candidates would swim 500 meters in full gear, climb aboard an anchored vessel using only a rope, complete a timed obstacle course on deck, then swim back to shore. It was designed to test everything they'd learned about underwater operations under realistic conditions. Derek was practically vibrating with excitement as they prepared their gear. "This is what I've been training for my whole life," he told his group. "Real combat simulation, not pool games." The ocean conditions were challenging but manageable: 3-foot swells with moderate currents and water, temperature in the low 60s. For experienced ocean swimmers, it was routine. For candidates whose experience came primarily from pools and calm water, it would be genuinely demanding. As they prepared to enter the water, Maria noticed something that Derek's group had missed. The current was running parallel to the shore, which meant candidates who swam directly toward the target vessel would be carried off course. Successful completion would require adjusting course to compensate for the drift. Derek entered the water, first, attacking the swim with the same aggressive energy he brought to everything else. His powerful stroke made impressive progress initially, but Maria could see he wasn't accounting for the current. With each stroke, he was being carried further off course, though he seemed unaware of the problem. Maria entered the water with a different strategy. She'd calculated the current's speed and direction, adjusting her course to let the ocean carry her toward the target rather than fighting against it. Her progress looked slower from shore, but she was maintaining a direct line toward the vessel. Halfway to the target, Derek's navigation error became obvious. He was now swimming at an angle to the vessel, fighting both the distance and the current. His impressive early speed was being offset by the extra distance he'd have to cover. Maria, meanwhile, arrived at the vessel with energy to spare, having worked with the ocean's forces rather than against them. As she climbed the rope toward the deck, she could see Derek still struggling through the water, his earlier confidence replaced by visible frustration. The lesson was clear, even if Derek's supporters weren't ready to acknowledge it yet. In the ocean, like in combat, understanding your environment and adapting to its demands mattered more than raw power or aggressive determination. But Maria had no way of knowing that this same ability to read conditions and adapt her approach would soon be the key to saving not just her own career, but the life of one of the Navy's most senior leaders. 3 weeks into training, the psychological pressure at Point Mugu had reached a breaking point for most candidates. 8 had already rung the bell, unable to handle the combination of physical demands, sleep deprivation, and constant evaluation. Those who remained moved through their days with the hollow-eyed determination of people pushing beyond their normal limits. Maria had found her rhythm in the brutal routine. Her EOD background had prepared her for extended periods of high stress, and her age gave her an advantage in pacing herself through the long days. While younger candidates burned bright and fast, she maintained steady performance across all evolutions. Derek's group, however, was beginning to show cracks. The Golden Boy himself remained at the top of most physical challenges, but his margin of superiority was shrinking as fatigue accumulated. More concerning, his decision-making under stress was becoming increasingly erratic. The morning that would change everything began with Hell Week's signature evolution, the log PT session. 7-man crews were required to carry, lift, and maneuver 200-pound telephone poles through a series of exercises designed to break down individual egos and build team cohesion. The catch was that success required coordination and communication, not just brute strength. Maria found herself assigned to Team 3, a mixed group that included Jackson, 2 former Marines named Peterson and Williams, a Navy surface warfare officer called Stevens, and unfortunately, Derek Thompson. Derek had specifically requested to be on Maria's team, though not for reasons that had anything to do with her capabilities. Finally get to see if the old-timer can keep up when things get serious. Derek had announced to his usual audience the night before. Time to separate the pretenders from the real operators. Master Chief Santos stood before the assembled teams as dawn broke over the Pacific. Log PT is about more than physical strength, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the beach. It's about functioning as a unit when every individual is at their breaking point. Your weakest member determines your team's capability. The implication was clear. Maria, as the oldest and presumably weakest member of Team 3, would be the limiting factor in their performance. The first evolution was the log press teams had to lift their 200-pound log overhead in unison. Hold it for 30 seconds, then lower it in perfect coordination. It required timing, communication, and distributed effort across all 7 members. Derek immediately assumed command of Team 3, positioning himself at the center of the log where he could control the timing. "All right, listen up," he barked. "I'll call the cadence. Everyone follows my lead, no improvising." Maria said nothing, but she noticed that Derek had positioned the team's 2 smallest members, herself and Stevens, at the ends of the log where leverage would be most disadvantageous. It was a setup that prioritized Derek's leadership visibility over the team's mechanical efficiency. "Up," Derek commanded, and the team struggled to lift the log overhead. The awkward positioning immediately created problems. Maria and Stevens were forced to compensate for poor leverage, while Derek and the larger team members in the middle had relatively easy lifts. They managed to complete the first press, but Maria could see the inefficiency in their approach. During the 30-second hold, she noticed that several team members were shaking with effort, while others seemed relatively comfortable. The load distribution was completely uneven. "Good work, team," Derek announced as they lowered the log. "Just needed better effort from the weak links." The second evolution was the log carry a half-mile run, with the log carried overhead by the entire team. Again, Derek positioned himself in the leadership role, calling cadence and controlling pace. But his aggressive approach to team leadership was creating exactly the kind of problems Maria had predicted. Within 200 yards, the uneven load distribution was causing chaos. Stevens was struggling to maintain his grip at the log's end, while Peterson and Williams in the middle were carrying disproportionate weight. Derek was calling for faster pace while team members were clearly struggling with basic coordination. Pick it up, Derek shouted as Stevens stumbled. We're losing ground to the other teams. Maria could see that Stevens was about to lose his grip entirely, which would send the 200-pound log crashing down on whoever was underneath it. In that moment, she made a decision that would define the rest of her SEAL training experience. Team, halt, Maria called out, using the command authority she'd learned during EOD operations. Stevens, switch positions with Peterson. Derek, we need to redistribute the load. Derek's face flushed with anger. I'm team leader here, Vasquez. You don't make calls. Someone's about to get hurt, Maria replied calmly. Stevens can't maintain that position, and if he drops his end, people get injured. Stevens is fine, Derek snapped. He just needs to toughen up. This is SEAL training, not a sensitivity workshop. Before Maria could respond, Stevens's grip failed. The log tilted sharply toward his end, and only Jackson's quick reaction prevented it from crushing Williams's shoulder. The team struggled to regain control as the log swayed dangerously above their heads. Drop the log, Master Chief Santos commanded from his observation position. Team 3, stand down. The team lowered the log to the sand, and Santos approached. With the kind of expression that promised serious consequences. What happened here? He demanded. Derek, step forward immediately. Team coordination issue, Master Chief. Some team members aren't pulling their weight. Santos looked at the team's positioning, then at Stevens, who was flexing his hands to restore circulation. Vasquez, what's your assessment? Maria glanced at Derek, knowing that her answer would have consequences beyond the immediate exercise. But 8 years of EOD work had taught her that safety always trumped politics. Load distribution was uneven, Master Chief. Stevens was carrying disproportionate weight at a mechanical disadvantage. I recommended repositioning to prevent injury. And the team leader's response? The team leader prioritized speed over safety, Master Chief. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek's face went through several shades of red as he realized that Maria had just undermined his leadership in front of an instructor. Several nearby teams had stopped their own exercises to watch the confrontation. Santos studied the team for a long moment. In SEAL operations, every team member has the responsibility to speak up when they see a safety issue. That responsibility doesn't depend on rank or position. He looked directly at Derek. Leadership means listening to your team, especially when they have relevant experience. Derek's jaw tightened, but he nodded stiffly. Understood, Master Chief. Reposition your team for proper load distribution and continue the exercise, Santos ordered. And Thompson, next time someone with 8 years of military experience offers a safety recommendation, you might want to listen. The remainder of the log carry proceeded without incident, but the damage to Derek's leadership mystique was irreversible. His team completed the evolution successfully with Maria's repositioning recommendations, but Derek's supporters had witnessed their golden boy being corrected by the woman they dismissed as dead weight. During the post-exercise debrief, Derek pulled Maria aside with barely controlled fury. You just undermined me in front of the whole class, he hissed. I don't know how things worked in your little EOD world, but here we have chain of command. And in my EOD world, people died when leadership ignored safety recommendations, Maria replied evenly. I'm not here to stroke anyone's ego. I'm here to become a SEAL. You're here because someone lost paperwork and you got assigned by mistake, Derek shot back. Everyone knows you don't belong. This little stunt won't change that. But Derek was wrong about that. Word of the incident spread through the candidate group within hours, and suddenly Maria's quiet competence was being viewed in a different light. Several candidates who'd previously dismissed her began asking questions about her EOD experience, and her approach to problem-solving under pressure. That evening, Jackson approached Maria during gear maintenance. "That thing with the log positioning," he said quietly. "How did you know Stevens was about to lose his grip?" "Experience," Maria replied. "You learn to read stress indicators when people's lives depend on it." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "Derek's been saying experience doesn't matter here, but you've been right about a lot of things he's been wrong about." Maria said nothing, but she filed the comment away. The cracks in Derek's leadership were beginning to show, and some of the smarter candidates were starting to notice. What none of them knew was that in just 2 weeks, a catastrophic equipment failure during a VIP demonstration would put Derek's aggressive leadership style to its ultimate test. And when lives hung in the balance, Maria's quiet competence would be the only thing standing between a four-star admiral and disaster. But first, she had to survive Derek's inevitable retaliation for challenging his authority. In Derek's mind, Maria Vasquez had just declared war, and he intended to win it by ensuring she never made it through. SEAL training. The real battle for Maria's future was about to begin. Derek Thompson's retaliation came swiftly and systematically. Within 48 hours of the log PT incident, Maria found herself isolated from team exercises and assigned to what Derek loudly called more appropriate duties for her skill set. His influence with both candidates and some instructors had grown to the point where questioning his recommendations was seen as disrupting unit cohesion. "Vasquez will be supporting today's diving evolution from the safety boat," announced Petty Officer Rodriguez during the morning briefing. "Her E8 experience makes her valuable for equipment monitoring and emergency response." It sounded reasonable, even logical. But Maria recognized it for what it was: a systematic removal from the training that would qualify her as a SEAL operator. Support roles were essential, but they weren't the path to earning the Trident pin that represented full SEAL qualification. Derek's smile was barely concealed as he addressed his team. "Makes sense," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Better to use people's existing strengths rather than force them into roles they're not suited for." The sting of being sidelined was made worse by the fact that Derek's reasoning wasn't entirely wrong. Maria's E8 background did make her exceptionally qualified for safety and equipment roles. The problem was that accepting those roles would effectively end her chances of completing SEAL training as an operator. From her position on the safety boat, Maria watched as Derek led his team through complex underwater navigation exercises. His techniques had improved significantly since the early weeks of training, and his natural athleticism was finally being channeled into effective underwater operations. Whatever his flaws as a team leader, Derek was becoming a competent SEAL operator. The irony wasn't lost on her. While she was being pushed toward support roles because of her expertise, Derek was succeeding precisely because he was learning to incorporate some of the methodical approaches she'd tried to share. He was taking credit for lessons he'd initially rejected, repackaging her techniques as his own innovations. Vasquez called Senior Chief Diana Brooks the senior enlisted advisor for the training program. Brooks was a legend in the Navy diving community, one of the first female divers to qualify for special operations support roles. "Walk with me." They moved away from the other instructors, stopping near the equipment shed where they could speak privately. Brooks studied Maria with the calculating gaze of someone who'd spent decades evaluating personnel under pressure. "You're being wasted on safety boat duty," Brooks said without preamble. "Your diving skills are better than half the instructors here, and your equipment knowledge is exceptional. But you're not going to finish this program if you keep getting assigned to support roles." Maria nodded, unsure how much she could say without appearing to criticize the training program's decisions. Brooks continued, "I've been watching the politics play out. Thompson has influence, I'll give him that. But influence and leadership aren't the same thing. The question is what you're willing to do about it." "I'm not sure I understand, Senior Chief." The equipment side of this program has been neglected, Brooks said, pulling out a thick folder. We've got diving gear that's improperly maintained, safety systems that haven't been updated in years, and protocols that don't match current operational requirements. Someone with your background could make a real difference. Maria accepted the folder, recognizing it as both an opportunity and a trap. Excellence in support roles would prove her value to the program, but it would also cement her position outside the operator track. Senior Chief, I appreciate the confidence, but my goal is to qualify as a SEAL operator, not to become a permanent support specialist. Brooks smiled grimly. I know what your goal is, but sometimes the path to where you want to go runs through places you didn't expect to visit. The question is whether you trust the process. Over the following weeks, Maria threw herself into the equipment oversight role with the same intensity she'd brought to operational training. She discovered problems that had been overlooked for months: diving regulators with partial blockages, safety lines with frayed sections, underwater communication systems with intermittent failures. Each problem she identified and fixed prevented potential accidents, but it also reinforced her reputation as a support specialist rather than an operator. Derek made sure everyone understood the distinction. Vasquez found another equipment issue, he would announce whenever Maria reported a problem. Good thing we have someone keeping an eye on the technical side while the rest of us focus on operations. The candidates who'd started questioning Derek's leadership after the Log PT incident gradually fell back into line. Maria's competence in support roles seemed to validate Derek's assertion that she belonged behind the scenes rather than in the field. But Maria was learning things that Derek and his followers couldn't see. Her access to equipment records and maintenance logs gave her insight into the training program's systemic issues. She discovered patterns of equipment failure that correlated with specific operational scenarios, safety protocols that existed on paper but weren't followed in practice, and performance data that painted a disturbing picture of candidate readiness. Most concerning was what she found in the historical records. Previous classes had experienced equipment failures during critical exercises that had been attributed to training stress or operational tempo. But Maria's analysis suggested that many of these failures were predictable and preventable with proper maintenance and oversight. She documented everything in detailed reports that she submitted through proper channels. Most disappeared into the administrative machinery without acknowledgement. But Senior Chief Brooks began visiting the equipment shed more frequently, asking pointed questions about Maria's findings. This analysis of regulator failures, Brooks said one afternoon, studying Maria's latest report. You're suggesting that current maintenance schedules are inadequate for the operational tempo we're running. Yes, Senior Chief. The equipment is being pushed beyond its rated capacity without corresponding increases in maintenance frequency. It's a recipe for catastrophic failure. Brooks nodded thoughtfully. And if equipment failed during a high visibility demonstration? Depending on the nature of the failure, it could range from embarrassing to fatal, Senior Chief. The conversation was interrupted by sounds of distress from the diving platform. One of Derek's team members had surfaced early from a navigation exercise, showing signs of equipment malfunction. Maria grabbed her emergency kit and headed for the water before anyone else had time to react. The candidate, Stevens from her former Log PT team, was struggling with a regulator that was delivering inconsistent airflow. Maria reached him within seconds, providing her backup regulator while diagnosing the problem. The faulty equipment was one of the units she'd flagged for replacement weeks earlier. Easy, Stevens, Maria said calmly as she guided him toward the platform. You're okay. Just breathe normally and let me handle the gear. Stevens nodded, his panic subsiding as Maria's calm competence took control of the situation. By the time they reached the platform, he was breathing normally again and the immediate crisis had passed. Derek was waiting at the platform edge, his expression a mixture of concern and irritation. What happened down there, Stevens? Regulator. Malfunction, Stevens replied, looking at Maria with obvious gratitude. Vasquez got to me before it became a real problem. Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Good thing someone was monitoring safety protocols. That's what support personnel are for. But Stevens wasn't finished. Actually, the response was incredible. She diagnosed the problem and had me stabilized before I even knew what was happening. That wasn't just monitoring, that was expert-level crisis management. Several other candidates had gathered to hear about the incident, and Stevens's account painted Maria in a very different light than Derek's usual characterizations. Here was someone who'd potentially saved a teammate's life through quick thinking and technical expertise. Master Chief Santos appeared at Maria's side as she was examining the faulty regulator. Good work, Vasquez. Clean response, textbook technique. Thank you, Master Chief. This is the third regulator failure this month. The maintenance schedule needs to be adjusted. Santos studied the equipment, then looked at Maria with new attention. You've been tracking failure patterns? Yes, Master Chief. I have detailed reports on all equipment issues and recommended solutions. I want to see those reports. All of them. As Santos walked away with Maria's documentation, Derek approached her with barely concealed hostility. Enjoy your moment, Vasquez, but this doesn't change anything. You're still support staff who got lucky. Maria looked at Derek, seeing past his confident exterior to the insecurity underneath. I'm not trying to change anything, Thompson. I'm just trying to keep people safe. That's exactly the problem, Derek replied. This isn't about keeping people safe. It's about creating warriors who can operate when safety isn't guaranteed. The philosophical divide between them had never been clearer. Derek saw safety consciousness as weakness, a limitation that would handicap operators in combat. Maria saw it as professionalism, the foundation that allowed operators to take calculated risks when missions demanded it. What neither of them knew was that in just days, a VIP demonstration would test both philosophies under the most demanding circumstances possible. And when equipment failure threatened the life of a four-star admiral, the question wouldn't be whether safety consciousness was weakness or strength. The question would be whether anyone was prepared to take the shot. That mattered most. Maria's new position in equipment oversight gave her access to parts of the Naval Special Warfare Training Center that most candidates never saw. The maintenance bays, communication centers, and administrative offices revealed a different side of SEAL training, one focused on the complex logistics and technical systems that made elite operations possible. What she discovered in those back rooms was deeply troubling. The equipment failure patterns she'd been documenting weren't random mechanical breakdowns. They were systematic problems caused by a training program that prioritized speed and intensity over proper maintenance and safety protocols. Diving gear was being pushed beyond manufacturer specifications. Safety equipment was being used past its recommended service life. Most concerning of all, these issues were being covered up rather than addressed. Look at this, Maria said to Senior Chief Brooks, spreading maintenance logs across the equipment room table. Regulator service intervals have been extended from 100 to 200 diving hours without manufacturer approval. Underwater communication systems are failing at 3 times the expected rate. And emergency ascent devices haven't been tested in over 6 months. Brooks studied the documentation with the grim expression of someone who'd seen similar problems before. How long have these issues been developing? Based on the logs, at least 18 months. But the failure rate has accelerated significantly in the past 6 months as training tempo increased. And command's response? Maria pulled out a thick folder of incident reports and administrative responses. Equipment failures are being classified as training stressors that help prepare candidates for real-world conditions. The attitude seems to be that if gear works perfectly in training, candidates won't be prepared for equipment failures in combat. Brooks was quiet for a long moment, reading through the reports. As one of the Navy's most experienced diving supervisors, she understood the implications better than anyone. "This is criminally negligent," she said finally. "Someone's going to die, and when they do, Command will act shocked that equipment failure caused the accident. Senior Chief, I've prepared a comprehensive report with recommendations for immediate safety improvements." "Who should I submit it to?" "That's complicated," Brooks replied. "The people who need to see this report are the same people who've been ignoring or covering up the problems. Commander Cross is focused on graduation rates and training efficiency. The administrative staff is overwhelmed with VIP visits and political pressures. And the maintenance department is understaffed and overworked." Maria felt the familiar frustration of recognizing a dangerous situation while being powerless to address it through normal channels. It was the same feeling she'd experienced during E-8 operations when administrative bureaucracy interfered with life-and-death safety protocols. "There has to be someone who'll listen," she said. "There is," Brooks replied. "But you're not going to like the timing." She explained that Admiral Victoria Hayes, the base commander, was scheduled to review the training program in 2 weeks as part of a comprehensive evaluation. The review would include a high-profile demonstration for visiting Pentagon officials and congressional staffers. It was exactly the kind of event where equipment failure could have catastrophic consequences. "Admiral Hayes has a reputation for cutting through bureaucracy when safety is involved," Brooks continued. "But getting her attention requires evidence that can't be ignored or explained away." Maria understood the implication. Her documented evidence of equipment problems was compelling, but it would likely be dismissed as the complaints of a support specialist who didn't understand operational requirements. What she needed was a demonstration of the consequences, preferably one that didn't result in anyone getting hurt. Over the following days, Maria began a more systematic investigation of the training program's equipment and safety protocols. Her EOD background had taught her to think like an investigator, tracking cause and effect relationships that others might miss. She discovered that the equipment problems weren't limited to diving gear. Communication systems were experiencing intermittent failures during critical exercises. Weapon systems were being maintained below manufacturer standards. Even basic safety equipment, like rescue boats and medical gear, showed signs of inadequate oversight. Most disturbing was what she found in the classified after-action reports from recent SEAL deployments. Several teams had experienced equipment failures in combat that matched the patterns she was seeing in training. The connection was clear. Inadequate training standards were leading to inadequate operational readiness. "This goes beyond point Mugu," Maria told Brooks during one of their evening discussions. "Teams are deploying with equipment and maintenance practices that put them at risk in the field. And you think Admiral Hayes will care about that?" "I think Admiral Hayes cares about combat effectiveness," Maria replied. "And there's nothing effective about equipment that fails when you need it most." Brooks nodded approvingly. "You're learning to think like a senior leader. The question is whether you're prepared for the consequences of challenging the system." The consequences became apparent sooner than Maria expected. Word of her equipment investigations had reached Derek and his supporters, who saw her activities as further evidence that she didn't belong in operational training. "Vasquez is playing politics now," Derek announced to his group during evening gear maintenance. "Can't cut it as an operator, so she's trying to become indispensable as a support specialist." Classic bureaucratic maneuvering. The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be credible. Maria was indeed trying to prove her value to the program, and her focus on safety and maintenance could be seen as avoiding the more challenging aspects of SEAL training. But Jackson, who'd been quietly observing the situation, offered a different perspective during a rare private conversation with Maria. "Derek's wrong about you," he said as they worked side by side in the equipment room. "I've been watching how you approach problems, and it's not about avoiding challenges. It's about understanding systems well enough to prevent failures. What do you mean? That regulator failure with Stevens, you didn't just respond to the emergency. You'd already identified that piece of equipment as problematic weeks earlier. You were predicting problems, not just reacting to them. Jackson's observation crystallized something Maria had been thinking about but hadn't articulated. Her approach to SEAL training wasn't fundamentally different from her approach to EOD work. Both required understanding complex systems well enough to anticipate failure points and prevent catastrophic consequences. In EOD, she explained to Jackson, you don't wait for bombs to explode before you figure out how they work. You study failure modes so you can prevent them. That's what I'm trying to do here. And Derek? Derek's approach is to be so tough that you can handle anything, including equipment failure. My approach is to prevent the failures in the first place. Which philosophy wins when lives are at stake? It was a question that would be answered sooner than either of them expected. The VIP demonstration was only days away, and Maria's equipment monitoring had identified several systems that were approaching critical failure points. She'd submitted reports, made recommendations, and requested immediate maintenance action. But the training schedule was too tight, the political pressure too intense, and the administrative machinery too slow to implement changes before the demonstration. As Maria reviewed her final safety assessment, the night before Admiral Hayes's arrival, she realized that everything was converging toward a single moment of truth. All the equipment problems she'd identified, all the safety protocols that had been ignored, all the systematic issues that had been covered up, they were about to be tested under the most demanding circumstances possible. A Four-Star Admiral would be observing SEAL candidates perform complex operations with equipment that Maria knew was inadequately maintained and potentially dangerous. If something went wrong, when something went wrong, the consequences would extend far beyond Point Mugu. Derek and his followers were confident that their superior training and Derek and his followers were confident that their superior trained that mental toughness would overcome any equipment issues. Maria knew that no amount of individual capability could compensate for systematic failures in the tools and systems that operators depended on. Tomorrow would reveal which philosophy was correct. And Maria had a growing certainty that she was the only person at Point Mugu who truly understood what was at stake. Admiral Victoria Hayes arrived at Point Mugu on a Tuesday morning with an entourage that transformed the normally isolated training center into a hub of political and military activity. Pentagon officials, congressional staffers, and senior Navy leadership filled the administrative buildings, all there to evaluate the efficiency and effectiveness of the Navy's premier SEAL training program. Maria watched from the equipment shed as the convoy of black SUVs rolled through the main gate. She'd spent the previous night conducting final safety checks on every piece of gear that would be used in the demonstration, finding 3 more pieces of equipment that should have been removed from service weeks ago. Her comprehensive safety report sat on Commander Cross's desk, 27 pages of documented equipment failures, maintenance deficiencies, and safety protocol violations. She'd submitted it through proper channels 48 hours earlier and received no response beyond a brief acknowledgement receipt. "Big day today," Senior Chief Brooks said, joining Maria at the window. "How are you feeling about the demonstration?" "Concerned," Maria replied honestly. "Too many systems are operating outside safe parameters. If something goes wrong during the VIP demonstration, it could end careers and change the entire program," Brooks finished. "The question is whether anyone with authority is listening to your warnings." They were interrupted by the arrival of Master Chief Santos, whose usually calm demeanor showed signs of stress. "Vasquez, I need to talk to you, now." Santos led her away from the equipment shed to a quiet area near the communications building. His expression was grim as he pulled out a folder that Maria recognized as her safety report. "Commander Cross showed me your analysis," Santos began. 27 pages of equipment problems and safety violations. Is this accurate? Every item is documented with supporting evidence, Master Chief. Equipment logs, maintenance records, failure reports, it's all verifiable. Santos nodded slowly. I've been reviewing the files, and you're right about the systemic problems. The question is timing. Why are you bringing this forward now, just before the biggest demonstration of the year? Maria felt the familiar weight of being questioned about her motives rather than her findings. Master Chief, I've been submitting reports on these issues for weeks. The timing isn't my choice, it's the result of problems that have been ignored until they became critical. And you don't think this could be seen as sabotage? A disgruntled candidate trying to undermine the program? The accusation hit like a physical blow. Maria had spent months documenting genuine safety concerns, only to have her motives questioned when she tried to prevent potential disasters. Master Chief, my job is to ensure equipment safety. These problems exist regardless of my personal situation. If I'm wrong about the risks, the demonstration will proceed without incident. If I'm right, if you're right, people could get hurt and the program could be shut down, Santos finished. Either way, your timing makes this look political. Before Maria could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Derek Thompson and 3 other senior candidates. Derek's expression showed barely concealed satisfaction as he approached. Master Chief, Derek said with respectful formality, some of the candidates are concerned about negative information being spread before today's demonstration. We want to make sure nothing undermines the program's reputation. Santos looked between Derek and Maria, clearly understanding the subtext. What kind of negative information? Equipment problems, safety violations, that sort of thing, Derek replied, his eyes fixed on Maria. The kind of complaints that could make VIP visitors nervous about our training standards. Maria realized she was witnessing a coordinated effort to discredit her reports before they could reach Admiral Hayes. Derek and his supporters had positioned her safety concerns as disloyalty to the program rather than genuine warnings about dangerous conditions. Vasquez, Santos said carefully, are you prepared to stand behind your reports if Admiral Hayes asks about them directly? Yes, Master Chief. Every finding is factual and documented. And are you prepared for the consequences if your concerns prove to be overblown? Maria understood the implicit threat. If the demonstration proceeded without incident, her credibility would be destroyed and her SEAL training would effectively be over. But if she remained silent and someone got hurt, I'm prepared to accept responsibility for my analysis, Master Chief. Santos nodded grimly. Then you'll have the opportunity to present your findings to Admiral Hayes personally. She's requested a briefing on all aspects of the training program, including safety and equipment readiness. Derek's confident expression faltered slightly. He'd expected Maria's reports to be buried in administrative bureaucracy, not elevated to the attention of the base commander. Master Chief, Derek said quickly, with respect, Admiral Hayes is here to evaluate our operational capabilities, not to review maintenance procedures. Maybe equipment issues should be handled through normal channels. Thompson, Admiral Hayes will decide what she wants to review, Santos replied sharply. Your job is to be ready for the demonstration. Vasquez's job is to ensure equipment safety. Both of you will do your jobs. As the group dispersed, Derek approached Maria with unconcealed hostility. You're making a huge mistake, he said quietly. If you embarrass this program in front of the Admiral, it won't just end your SEAL aspirations. It'll follow you for the rest of your Navy career. And if I stay quiet and someone gets killed because I didn't speak up, Maria replied. What kind of career would that be? Derek's eyes narrowed. The kind where you understand loyalty and team cohesion. But I guess that's too complicated for someone who's never been part of a real team. The personal attack stung, but Maria had learned to separate emotional reactions from professional responsibilities. We'll see what Admiral Hayes thinks about team cohesion when she reviews the equipment failure data. Derek walked away without responding, but Maria could see the calculation in his expression. He was already planning how to minimize the impact of her reports and position himself as the reasonable alternative to her disruptive influence. That afternoon, Maria received word that Admiral Hayes wanted to meet with her before the evening demonstration. The meeting would take place in the base commander's office, with Commander Cross and Master Chief Santos present. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes briefing that could determine the future of both her career and the training program. As she prepared her presentation, Maria reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. 8 months ago, she'd been a successful EOD specialist looking for a new challenge. Now she was potentially about to end the career of a man she'd once respected and expose systemic problems in one of the Navy's most prestigious programs. But every time she questioned her decision to speak up, she remembered Stephen struggling underwater with faulty equipment, or thought about the SEAL teams deploying with inadequately maintained gear. The choice wasn't between loyalty and disloyalty. It was between professional integrity and willful blindness. Senior Chief Brooks found her in the equipment room as she was gathering her documentation for the briefing. "How are you holding up?" Brooks asked. "Nervous," Maria admitted. "This could change everything." "It already has," Brooks replied. "The question now is whether the changes will be positive or negative." Admiral Hayes has a reputation for making decisions based on facts rather than politics. If your analysis is solid, she'll listen. And if the demonstration goes perfectly, despite the equipment problems, then you'll have learned an important lesson about the difference between being right and being effective, Brooks said. "But I don't think that's going to happen." As evening approached and the demonstration preparations intensified, Maria felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. In a few hours, she would either be vindicated as a professional who'd prevented a disaster, or dismissed as a troublemaker who'd undermined an important program based on overblown concerns. What she didn't know was that Admiral Hayes had already begun her own investigation into the training program safety standards. The Admiral had received reports from other sources about equipment problems and maintenance deficiencies, and Maria's detailed analysis was exactly the kind of evidence she needed to take decisive action. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just Maria's future, but the future of SEAL training itself. And at the center of it all was a simple question. When lives were at stake, was loyalty to the program more important than loyalty to the truth? Admiral Victoria Hayes possessed the kind of command presence that transformed any room she entered. At 52, she'd risen through the Navy's ranks during an era when female officers faced barriers that no longer existed, earning her position through a combination of tactical brilliance and unwavering integrity. When she walked into the Point Mugu conference room for Maria's briefing, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. "Specialist Vasquez," Admiral Hayes said, taking her seat across from Maria at the polished conference table. "I understand. You have concerns about our training program safety standards." Commander Cross sat to the Admiral's right, his expression carefully neutral, but his tension obvious. Master Chief Santos occupied a chair near the door, positioned like a referee ready to intervene if the discussion became heated. The weight of institutional hierarchy filled the room like smoke. "Yes, ma'am," Maria replied, opening her folder of documentation. "I've identified systematic equipment maintenance deficiencies that pose significant safety risks during training operations." Admiral Hayes gestured for Maria to continue, her gray eyes focused with the intensity of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions based on incomplete information. For the next 20 minutes, Maria presented her findings with the methodical precision she'd learned during EOD operations. Equipment failure patterns, maintenance schedule violations, safety protocol deviations, each item supported by documented evidence and cross-referenced with manufacturer specifications. "These diving regulators," Maria said, pulling out a damaged unit, "have been in service 300% longer than recommended intervals. The failure rate in training exercises has increased by 400% over the past 6 months. We're essentially conducting operations with equipment that's guaranteed to fail." Admiral Hayes examined the regulator, her expression growing more serious as Maria continued. "And Command's response to these failures?" Maria glanced at Commander Cross before answering. "Equipment failures have been classified as valuable training stressors that prepare candidates for real-world conditions, ma'am." The silence that followed was deafening. Admiral Hayes set down the regulator and looked directly at Commander Cross. "Commander, is Specialist Vasquez's assessment accurate?" Cross shifted uncomfortably. "Admiral, the training program requires realistic stress conditions. Some equipment degradation is inevitable given our operational tempo." "That's not what I asked, Commander. Is her technical analysis accurate? The equipment issues she's identified do exist, but they're being managed within acceptable risk parameters." Admiral Hayes turned back to Maria. "Specialist, what's your assessment of tonight's demonstration equipment?" Maria had dreaded this question, knowing that her answer would determine whether the high-profile demonstration proceeded or was canceled with enormous political consequences. "Ma'am, I've identified 12 pieces of equipment that should be removed from service immediately. 6 more that require urgent maintenance before use. The communication systems have a 30% failure rate under stress conditions. If the demonstration proceeds with current equipment status, there's a significant probability of failure that could result in injury or death." The room fell silent again. Through the window, Maria could see the demonstration preparations continuing, candidates running final equipment checks, VIP viewing areas being arranged, media personnel setting up cameras. Hundreds of people were depending on the evenings. Events proceeding smoothly. Admiral Hayes studied Maria for a long moment. "Specialist, you understand that canceling or delaying tonight's demonstration would have serious consequences for this program and everyone involved?" "Yes, ma'am, and you're willing to stake your career on the accuracy of your assessment?" Maria thought about Derek's warnings, about the political pressure to maintain program schedules, about the easy path of staying quiet and hoping for the best. Then she thought about Stephen struggling underwater with faulty equipment, about SEAL teams deploying with inadequately maintained gear, about the fundamental responsibility to speak truth to power when lives were at stake. "Yes, ma'am, I am." Admiral Hayes nodded slowly, then turned to Commander Cross. "Commander, I want every piece of equipment Specialist Vasquez has flagged inspected by independent technicians within the next 2 hours. If her assessment is confirmed, the demonstration will be modified to eliminate unsafe elements." Cross's face flushed. "Admiral, with respect, we have Pentagon officials and congressional staff arriving in 3 hours. The political implications of modifying the demonstration are less important than the safety implications of proceeding with defective equipment." Admiral Hayes cut him off. "If this program is producing unsafe conditions in training, what does that say about our operational readiness?" As the meeting concluded, Admiral Hayes asked Maria to remain behind. When they were alone, the Admiral's formal demeanor softened slightly. "Specialist, off the record, why are you really doing this? You had to know that challenging the program would end your chances of completing SEAL training." Maria considered her answer carefully. "Ma'am, I joined the Navy to serve something bigger than myself. If I stay quiet while people are put at unnecessary risk, I'm not serving anything except my own career ambitions." Admiral Hayes smiled grimly. "That's either the most noble thing I've heard in years, or the most naive. Possibly both." She stood to leave, then paused. "Either way, it's exactly the kind of integrity I want to see in our special operations community." As the Admiral left, Maria remained in the conference room, staring out at the demonstration preparations. In a few hours, she would either be vindicated as a professional who'd prevented a disaster, or destroyed as a troublemaker who'd sabotaged an important program. The equipment inspections proceeded with military efficiency. Independent technicians swarmed over every piece of gear Maria had flagged, testing, measuring, and documenting their findings. As the results came in, a disturbing picture emerged. Maria's assessment had been conservative. The equipment problems were worse than she'd reported, not better. 3 diving regulators failed catastrophically during pressure testing. 2 underwater communication systems showed complete signal loss under simulated stress conditions. A rescue boat's engine seized during routine startup, and safety lines snapped under loads well below their rated capacity. By sunset, it was clear that proceeding with the original demonstration would have been criminally negligent. Commander Cross found Maria in the equipment shed as she was preparing modified gear for the revised demonstration. His expression showed a mixture of anger, respect, and resignation. "Vasquez," he said quietly, "you were right about everything." Maria nodded but said nothing, focusing on her equipment checks. "The Admiral wants to see you after the demonstration," Cross continued. "She's impressed with your analysis and your courage in presenting it." "And my SEAL training?" Cross was quiet for a moment. "That's above my authority now. But I will say this. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of independent thinking and moral courage that we want in our operators. The question is whether the program is ready for someone like you." As evening approached and the modified demonstration began, Maria watched from the equipment monitoring station. The VIP guests were told that the changes represented enhanced realism rather than safety corrections, preserving the program's reputation while incorporating Maria's recommendations. Derek Thompson performed flawlessly in the scaled-back demonstration, his natural abilities shining even with properly maintained equipment. But Maria noticed something that others missed. His technique was actually better with reliable gear. The compensation patterns he'd developed for faulty equipment disappeared when he could trust his tools. Four-Star Admiral Robert Kane, the evening's most senior VIP guest, observed the proceedings with the critical eye of someone who'd spent decades evaluating military capabilities. As the demonstration concluded, he approached Admiral Hayes with obvious satisfaction. "Outstanding program, Victoria," Kane said. "This is exactly the kind of adaptive training our operators need." Admiral Hayes glanced toward Maria's monitoring station. "Thank you, Admiral. We've been making some important improvements to our safety and equipment standards." What none of them knew was that the evening's success had been purchased with Maria's career sacrifice. By speaking up about the equipment problems, she'd saved the demonstration and possibly prevented injuries or deaths. But she'd also marked herself as someone willing to challenge authority when she believed it was necessary. In the special operations community, that kind of independence was simultaneously valued and feared. Tomorrow would determine which reaction would prevail. The emergency began at 0847 hours the following morning. During what should have been a routine farewell demonstration for Admiral Kane and his Pentagon delegation, the Four-Star Admiral had requested an extended tour of Point Mugu's facilities, including a live-fire exercise showcasing advanced maritime assault techniques. Maria was monitoring communications from the equipment shed when the first distress call crackled through the radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Seahawk 2. We have engine failure and are going down." "Repeat, engine failure, ditching in the channel." The helicopter carrying Admiral Kane and 3 staff members had lost power during a routine transfer flight between the training areas. Pilot Chief Warrant Officer Martinez, no relation to Maria, was executing an emergency autorotation toward the rocky coastline north of Point Mugu, where the Pacific Ocean met jagged cliffs in a maze of dangerous currents and hidden rocks. "All stations, this is base control," came Master Chief Santos's voice over the emergency frequency. Seahawk 2 is down in Sector 7, initiating search and rescue protocols. All available assets respond immediately. Maria grabbed her emergency gear and headed for the rescue boat dock, where chaos was already erupting. The rescue boat crew was struggling with an engine that had been on her critical maintenance list, one of the systems that had been deemed acceptable risk, despite showing clear signs of impending failure. "Engine won't turn over," shouted Petty. Officer Williams, the boat coxswain. "Starter's completely dead." Derek Thompson appeared at the dock with his usual team, already suited up in diving gear. "We'll take the backup boat," he announced, assuming command of the rescue operation. "Candidates, prep for water recovery ops." But the backup boat was one of the vessels Maria had specifically flagged for mechanical problems. Its navigation system was unreliable, its communications equipment had a 40% failure rate, and its rescue hoist hadn't been properly tested in over 3 months. "Thompson, that boat isn't safe for rescue operations," Maria called out as she reached the dock. "The hoist system failed inspection yesterday." Derek spun around, his face flushed with anger and adrenaline. "Vasquez, this isn't the time for your safety theater. There's a Four-Star Admiral in the water, and we're going to get him." "Not with equipment that's going to fail when you need it most," Maria replied, checking her own gear. "Give me 30 seconds to grab the emergency repair kit." "We don't have 30 seconds, Derek snapped. "Every minute we waste here is a minute Admiral Kane is fighting hypothermia." The philosophical divide between them had never been more stark. Derek saw Maria's safety consciousness as an obstacle to immediate action. Maria saw Derek's rush to respond as likely to turn a rescue operation into a multiple casualty event. Senior Chief Brooks arrived at the dock as Derek was starting the backup boat's engines. "Status report," she barked. "Helicopter down in Sector 7 with Admiral Kane aboard," Derek replied. "We're launching immediate rescue ops." Brooks looked at the backup boat, then at Maria. "Vasquez, what's the status of that vessel?" "Mechanically unsound for rescue operations. Senior Chief, navigation system unreliable, communications intermittent, rescue hoist untested, and the primary rescue boat, engine failure. I can have it operational in 20 minutes with the right parts." 20 minutes that Admiral Kane didn't have. Brooks made the kind of decision that defines senior leadership under pressure. "Thompson, take your team and provide search support only. No rescue attempts until we have reliable equipment. Vasquez, get that primary boat operational, now." Derek's frustration boiled over. "Senior Chief, with respect, we're wasting time while people are dying. I can handle whatever equipment problems come up. Can you handle a Four-Star Admiral drowning because your rescue hoist failed?" Brooks shot back. "This isn't about being tough enough to overcome problems. It's about preventing them." As Derek's team launched in the unreliable backup boat, Maria dove into emergency repairs on the primary rescue vessel. Her EOD background had prepared her for exactly this kind of crisis, working under extreme time pressure to restore critical systems when lives depended on success. The engine's starter motor had failed due to moisture intrusion, a problem she'd identified weeks earlier, but had been unable to address due to operational tempo requirements. Using a field expedient repair technique she'd learned during EOD operations, Maria bypassed the damaged component and restored engine functionality in 12 minutes. "Seahawk 2, this is Rescue 1, she called over the radio as the primary. Boat roared to life. "We're en route to your position. What's your status?" The reply came through with heavy static and wind noise. "Rescue 1, we're in the water approximately 200 yards north of Devil's Rock. Admiral Kane and 2 passengers conscious and accounted for, but hypothermia is setting in fast. We need immediate extraction." Devil's Rock was a notorious navigation hazard, a barely submerged granite formation that had claimed several vessels over the years. The area's currents were unpredictable, and the rocky bottom made traditional anchoring impossible. It was exactly the kind of environment where equipment reliability could mean the difference between successful rescue and disaster. Maria's boat reached the crash site to find Derek's team already in the water, attempting a swimming rescue of Admiral Kane. But the equipment problems Maria had predicted were already manifesting. Their backup boat's navigation system had failed, leaving them anchored in the wrong position. The communications equipment was cutting in and out, making coordination nearly impossible. "Thompson, this is Rescue 1, Maria called over the radio. "Your position is too close to Devil's Rock. You need to move to deeper water." Derek's voice came back broken and distorted. "Negative ... got. Under control ... proceeding with ... extraction." Through her binoculars, Maria could see the problem developing. Derek's team was fighting the current to reach Admiral Kane, but their backup boat was drifting toward the submerged rocks. Without reliable navigation or communications, they were operating blind in one of the most dangerous areas off Point Mugu. Admiral Kane, visible in the water wearing his survival vest, was clearly struggling with hypothermia. The helicopter crew had managed to deploy an emergency life raft, but the Admiral and his staff were still exposed to the Pacific's killing cold. Maria made a decision that would define the rest of her career. Instead of attempting a direct rescue approach like Derek's team, she positioned her boat in deeper water and deployed the rescue swimmer, protocol she'd learned during Coast Guard cross-training. It was slower than Derek's aggressive approach, but it was also more reliable under dangerous conditions. "Admiral Kane, this is Rescue 1, she called through the boat's public address system. "We're deploying a rescue swimmer to your position. Maintain your current location and prepare for assisted extraction." The rescue swimmer Jackson, who'd volunteered for the dangerous assignment, entered the water with a safety line and rescue harness. Maria coordinated his approach using the boat's sonar to avoid underwater hazards while maintaining constant radio contact. As Jackson reached Admiral Kane, Derek's backup boat finally succumbed to the equipment failures Maria had predicted. The navigation system's complete failure had left them too close to Devil's Rock, and without reliable engines or steering, they were being swept toward the submerged granite. "Mayday, mayday, this is backup boat," came Derek's panicked voice over the radio. "We're taking on water and losing power. Request immediate assistance." In the span of 30 minutes, a simple helicopter rescue had become a multiple casualty event involving a Four-Star Admiral, 3 staff members, and 6 SEAL candidates. The only reliable rescue asset was Maria's properly maintained boat with its functioning equipment and systematic safety protocols. The next few minutes would test everything Maria had learned about crisis management, equipment reliability, and the difference between heroic gestures and effective action. Admiral Kane's life hung in the balance, along with the careers and reputations of everyone involved in the operation. But this was exactly the kind of situation Maria had been preparing for her entire career. A complex emergency where technical expertise, systematic thinking, and reliable equipment were more valuable than individual heroics or aggressive determination. The next 12 minutes would be remembered as one of the most complex rescue operations in Point Mugu's history. Maria found herself coordinating 3 separate emergencies simultaneously. Admiral Kane and his staff fighting hypothermia in the water, Derek's team stranded on a failing boat near dangerous rocks, and Jackson swimming through treacherous currents to reach the Admiral. "Rescue 1, this is Base Control," came Master Chief Santos's voice over the radio. "Additional assets are en route, but your primary rescue for all personnel. What's your status?" Maria keyed her microphone while maintaining visual contact. "With all 3 crisis points. Base Control, I have 1 swimmer in the water approaching. Admiral Kane, backup boat is taking on water near Devil's Rock with 6 personnel aboard. Requesting immediate Coast Guard assistance for multiple casualties. Coast Guard ETA 20 minutes, Santos replied. You're on your own until then. 20 minutes was longer than Admiral Kane could survive in the Pacific's killing cold. It was also longer than Derek's damaged boat could stay afloat. Maria had to prioritize rescue operations with limited resources and no margin for error. Through her binoculars, she watched Jackson reach Admiral Kane's position. The Admiral was conscious but clearly hypothermic, his movements sluggish and coordination deteriorating. Jackson deployed the rescue harness with professional efficiency, but the extraction would require precise boat handling in dangerous waters. Jackson, this is Rescue 1, Maria called over the radio. I'm going to position for pickup in deeper water. Can you assist Admiral Kane to the extraction point? Affirmative, Rescue 1. Admiral's responsive but hypothermic. Need immediate extraction. Maria began the delicate process of maneuvering her boat into position for the rescue. The waters around Devil's Rock were notorious for sudden depth changes and unpredictable currents. One navigation error could put her boat on the rocks, turning a rescue operation into another casualty event. This was where her EOD experience became invaluable. Years of working in dangerous underwater environments had taught her to read water conditions like a textbook. She could see current patterns that others missed, identify depth changes from surface disturbances, and position her vessel with the precision of someone whose life had often depended on such skills. As she maneuvered toward Jackson and Admiral Kane, Derek's voice crackled over the radio with increasing desperation. Rescue 1. We're taking on water fast. Need immediate assistance. Maria looked toward Derek's position, where the backup boat was clearly listing and losing power. 6 SEAL candidates were aboard, including some of the program's top performers. Saving them should have been the priority. 6 trained operators versus 1 aging Admiral and his staff, but Maria had learned something during her EAD career that Derek apparently hadn't. In crisis situations, you save who you can in the order. That gives everyone the best chance of survival. Admiral Kane was closest to rescue and most at risk from hypothermia. Derek's team, while in danger, had survival gear and training that would keep them alive longer. Thompson, this is Rescue 1. Maria replied. Deploy life rafts and prepare for extended survival. I'm extracting Admiral Kane first, then returning for your team. Negative. Derek's voice was sharp with panic and frustration. We're going down now. You need to get us first. It was the moment that defined the fundamental difference between Derek's leadership philosophy and Maria's professional approach. Derek saw the situation through the lens of personal survival and immediate action. Maria saw it as a complex problem requiring systematic solutions based on objective risk assessment. Thompson, Admiral Kane has maybe 5 minutes before hypothermia becomes fatal. You have survival gear and training. Follow emergency procedures and wait for extraction. Maria reached Jackson's position and began the careful process of bringing Admiral Kane aboard. The Admiral was barely conscious, his lips blue, and his speech slurred from cold exposure. Every second mattered, but rushing the extraction could result in injury or losing the Admiral back into the water. Easy, Admiral, Maria said as Jackson guided him toward the boat's rescue platform. We've got you, just hold on. Admiral Kane's eyes focused on Maria with obvious effort. The others, he managed through chattering teeth. Everyone's accounted for, sir. We're getting everyone out. The Admiral nodded weakly, then lost consciousness as they brought him aboard. Maria immediately began emergency warming procedures, while Jackson retrieved the Admiral's staff members from their life raft. 3 more hypothermic casualties, but all breathing and responsive. Base control, this is Rescue 1, Maria reported as she secured the Admiral's staff. I have Admiral Kane and 3 passengers aboard, all hypothermic but stable. Proceeding to extract 6 personnel from disabled vessel. Outstanding work, Rescue 1, medical team standing by. Maria turned her boat toward Derek's position, where the backup vessel was now visibly sinking. Derek's team had deployed emergency rafts, but their survival window was closing rapidly. The Pacific Ocean showed no mercy to anyone, regardless of their training or attitude. As she approached Derek's position, Maria could see him in the water, supporting one of his teammates who appeared to be injured. Whatever his flaws as a leader, Derek's physical courage was undeniable. He was risking his own survival to help a teammate, even as his earlier decisions had created the crisis. "Thompson, I'm approaching from your starboard side," Maria called. "Prepare for rescue operations." Derek's voice came back weak but determined. "Stevens is unconscious. Think he hit his head when the boat started taking on water. Get him first." For a moment, Maria saw past Derek's arrogance to the SEAL he could become, someone willing to put his teammates' safety before his own, even in desperate circumstances. It was the kind of selfless leadership that the program was supposed to develop. The rescue of Derek's team required all of Maria's technical skills and crisis management experience. 6 hypothermic candidates, 1 unconscious, extraction from emergency rafts in rough water near dangerous rocks. Each step had to be executed perfectly, with no room for the kind of heroic improvisation that looked good in movies, but killed people in real life. "Jackson, take the rescue line to Stevens first," Maria ordered. "Slow and steady, one mistake puts everyone back in the water." Jackson nodded and slipped back into the Pacific, this time with a rescue harness designed for unconscious casualties. Maria watched through her binoculars as he reached Stevens and began the delicate process of securing him for extraction. Derek, still in the water supporting another teammate, watched the systematic rescue operation with obvious recognition. This was what professional crisis management looked like: calm, methodical, effective. No drama, no heroics, just competent execution of procedures designed to save lives. "Vasquez," Derek called as Jackson brought Stevens alongside the boat. I was wrong. About the equipment, about rushing the response. You were right." Maria didn't respond immediately, focused on bringing Stevens aboard and checking his vital signs. Only after she'd secured him and verified he was breathing did she look at Derek, still in the water waiting his turn for rescue. "Thompson, we'll discuss philosophy later. Right now, let's get everyone home alive." By the time the Coast Guard arrived, Maria had successfully extracted all 9 casualties from the water. Admiral Kane and his staff were conscious and warming up in the boat's emergency shelter. Derek's team was hypothermic but stable, with Stevens showing signs of regaining consciousness. The complex rescue operation had taken 43 minutes from initial emergency call to final extraction. No fatalities, no additional injuries, and no equipment failures that compromised the mission. It was exactly the kind of outcome that systematic preparation and reliable equipment made possible. As they headed back to Point Mugu, Admiral Kane managed to sit up and look at Maria with clear eyes. "Who's running this operation?" he asked. "Specialist Maria Vasquez, sir. EOD background, currently in SEAL training." Admiral Kane nodded slowly. "Outstanding work, specialist." That was textbook crisis management under impossible conditions. Maria glanced at Derek, who was sitting quietly near the boat's stern, processing the events of the morning. The golden boy of SEAL training had just learned the difference between looking like a warrior and being an effective operator. The question was whether the lesson would stick and whether the program would recognize the value of Maria's approach. The aftermath of the rescue operation transformed Point Mugu in ways that no one could have predicted. Within hours of the successful extraction, Admiral Kane had initiated a comprehensive review of SEAL training protocols, equipment standards, and leadership development. The woman who'd been dismissed as too old and too cautious suddenly found herself at the center of the Navy's most prestigious special operations program. Maria sat in the base medical facility, Receiving treatment. For minor hypothermia exposure, when Admiral Victoria Hayes approached with a folder that would change everything. Specialist Vasquez, Admiral Hayes said, taking a seat beside Maria's examination table. Admiral Kane has requested a personal debriefing on this morning's events. He's particularly interested in your analysis of the equipment failures that led to the crisis. Maria nodded, still processing the morning's events. Yes, ma'am. Everything that failed today was documented in my safety reports. I know, Admiral Hayes replied grimly. Which raises serious questions about how we've been managing risk in this program. Admiral Kane wants you to brief his staff on systematic improvements to our training and equipment protocols. The irony wasn't lost on Maria. 3 days ago, she'd been relegated to support duties because her safety consciousness was seen as incompatible with SEAL operations. Now she was being asked to redesign the program's fundamental approach to risk management. Ma'am, what about my SEAL training? Will I be able to complete the program? Admiral Hayes smiled for the first time since Maria had met her. Specialist. After this morning's performance, I think the question is whether the program is ready for you. Admiral Kane has some ideas about that. 2 hours later, Maria found herself in the base conference room, facing the same panel that had questioned her safety concerns just days earlier. But the dynamic had shifted dramatically. Instead of defending her warnings about equipment problems, she was being asked to lead the solution. Admiral Kane, recovered from his hypothermia, but still showing the effects of his ordeal, addressed the assembled group with the authority of someone who just experienced the consequences of systemic failures firsthand. This morning's events could have resulted in the deaths of multiple personnel, including myself, Admiral Kane began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd looked death in the face. The only reason we're all alive is because one person in this organization had the professional courage to identify problems and the technical competence to solve them under pressure. He looked directly at Maria. Specialist Vasquez, your equipment analysis was not only accurate, it was conservative. The failures we experienced were worse than you predicted. More importantly, your crisis management during the rescue operation was textbook perfect. You made decisions under extreme pressure that saved 9 lives. Derek Thompson sat near the back of the room, his usual confidence replaced by quiet reflection. The events of the morning had forced him to confront the limitations of his aggressive leadership style. When Maria had prioritized Admiral Kane's rescue over his team's immediate extraction, Derek had initially seen it as abandonment. Now he understood it as professional decision-making based on objective risk assessment. Commander Cross, Admiral Kane continued, I want Specialist Vasquez to lead a comprehensive review of our training protocols, equipment standards, maintenance, procedures, risk assessment, everything. And I want her recommendations implemented immediately. Commander Cross, who had initially dismissed Maria's concerns as disruptive, now found himself nodding in agreement. Yes, Admiral, we'll provide full support for the review. But Admiral Kane wasn't finished. There's another matter to address. The question of Specialist Vasquez's completion of SEAL training. Maria felt her stomach tighten. Despite the morning's success, she was still technically a candidate who'd been moved to support duties. Her future in the program remained uncertain. Sir, Derek Thompson said, standing up from his position near the back of the room, I'd like to say something. Admiral Kane nodded for him to continue. Derek looked directly at Maria, his expression showing a humility that hadn't been there before. Admiral, I've spent this entire training program believing that being a SEAL was about individual toughness and aggressive action. This morning showed me I was wrong. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Specialist Vasquez demonstrated something I didn't understand before, that real leadership means making the hard decisions that keep everyone alive, even when those decisions aren't popular. She saved my life and the lives of my teammates because She was willing to challenge the system when it was wrong. The room was silent as Derek continued. If this program is about creating effective operators, then Specialist Vasquez has already proven she belongs here. Not just as a support specialist, but as a SEAL operator who can lead when it matters most. Several other candidates murmured. Agreement, including Jackson and Stevens, who'd both been rescued by Maria's systematic approach. The social dynamics that had once isolated Maria were reversing as the reality of her competence became undeniable. Admiral Kane listened to the discussion, then made a decision that would reshape SEAL training for years to come. Specialist Vasquez. Effective immediately, you're reinstated as a SEAL candidate with full operational status. But you're also being assigned as the program's first-ever safety and equipment officer, with authority to halt any training evolution that presents unnecessary risk. It was an unprecedented position, a candidate who also held instructor-level authority over safety protocols. But the morning's events had proven that Maria's unique combination of technical expertise and operational judgment was exactly what the program needed. Furthermore, Admiral Kane continued, you'll be developing new curriculum focused on systematic risk assessment and crisis management. Too many of our operators have been trained to overcome problems through individual toughness, rather than prevent them through professional competence. Senior Chief Brooks, who had quietly supported Maria throughout her struggles, stepped forward. Admiral, I'd like to volunteer as Specialist Vasquez's assistant in developing the new protocols. Her approach to equipment management in crisis response could revolutionize how we prepare operators for real-world missions. The meeting concluded with Maria receiving assignments that would keep her at Point Mugu for an additional 6 months beyond normal SEAL training. She would complete her operator qualifications while simultaneously redesigning the program's approach to safety, equipment, and leadership development. As the room emptied, Derek approached Maria with an expression that mixed respect with embarrassment. Vasquez, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my life and the lives of my teammates. Maria studied Derek's face, seeing genuine recognition rather than the political calculation she'd grown accustomed to. Thompson, we all make mistakes. The question is whether we learn from them. I want to learn, Derek said earnestly. This morning, watching you coordinate that rescue operation, that's what leadership looks like. Not the aggressive posturing I've been doing, but calm competence under pressure. Maria nodded. The program has room for different leadership styles. Your physical courage and competitive drive have value. But they work best when they're guided by systematic thinking and genuine concern for your team's welfare. That evening, as Maria reviewed her new assignments and responsibilities, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 8 months ago, she'd been an EOD specialist looking for a new challenge. She'd been dismissed as too old, too cautious, and too focused on safety to succeed in the aggressive world of SEAL operations. Now she was being asked to reshape that world, to create a program that valued systematic competence alongside individual toughness. The woman who'd been relegated to support duties was about to become one of the most influential figures in modern SEAL training. But Maria understood that her real victory wasn't personal recognition or career advancement. It was the knowledge that future SEAL operators would be better prepared for the complex challenges they'd face in the field. They would understand that true strength wasn't about overcoming problems through individual heroics, but about preventing them through professional competence and systematic thinking. The rescue of Admiral Kane had proven that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the person everyone needs. And sometimes the qualities that seem like weaknesses, caution, systematic thinking, and attention to detail, are actually the greatest strengths of all. 6 months later, Maria Vasquez stood at the same dock where her SEAL journey had nearly ended, watching a new class of candidates prepare for their first major water evolution. But everything about Point Mugu had changed, and so had she. The Worn fatigues and uncertain demeanor of her early days had been replaced by the confident bearing of someone who'd earned their place through demonstrated competence. The gold trident pin on her chest marked her as a fully qualified Navy SEAL. But it was the instructor's whistle around her neck that represented her real achievement. "Candidates, gather around." Maria called to the assembled group of 24 hopefuls who just arrived for what was now called the Integrated SEAL Training Program. "Before we begin today's evolution, I want you to understand something fundamental about what it means to be a SEAL." The candidates, a mix of ages, backgrounds, and experience levels that would have been impossible under the old program, formed a semicircle around Maria. Among them was Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a 28-year-old surface warfare officer whose analytical approach reminded Maria of herself. There was also Petty Officer Marcus Johnson, a former Marine whose aggressive leadership style echoed Derek Thompson's early behavior. 6 months ago, this program nearly lost a Four-Star Admiral because we prioritized speed over safety, individual toughness over systematic competence, Maria continued. Today's training is designed to ensure that never happens again. She gestured toward the water, where new safety boats equipped with redundant systems and properly maintained equipment waited for the day's exercises. The changes she'd implemented weren't just cosmetic, they represented a fundamental shift in how the Navy approached elite operator training. Your success in this program won't be measured by how fast you can complete evolutions or how tough you look doing it, Maria explained. It will be measured by your ability to make the right decisions under pressure, to lead effectively in crisis situations, and to bring your teammates home alive. Derek Thompson approached the group, now wearing the chevrons of a petty officer, second class, and serving as Maria's assistant instructor. His transformation over the past 6 months had been as dramatic as Maria's rise to leadership. The swagger and arrogance had been replaced by quiet competence and genuine concern for candidate development. "Candidates," Derek said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned hard lessons about leadership. "Instructor Vasquez is going to teach you something that took me nearly washing out to understand. Real strength isn't about overcoming problems through individual effort. It's about preventing them through professional competence." Maria smiled at Derek's words, remembering the hostile young man who dismissed her as too old and too cautious for SEAL operations. The rescue operation had changed him as much as it had changed her, forcing him to confront the limitations of his aggressive approach and embrace a more systematic philosophy. "Today's evolution is a maritime rescue scenario," Maria announced. "You'll be working in teams of 4, with mixed experience levels and rotating leadership. Your equipment is properly maintained and fully functional, but the scenario parameters will test your decision-making and crisis management skills." Lieutenant Shun raised her hand. "Instructor Vasquez, what happens if we identify safety issues during the evolution?" "Outstanding question, Chun. Every team member has the authority and responsibility to halt any evolution if they identify genuine safety concerns. We'd rather explain a stopped exercise than conduct a memorial service." It was a radical departure from the old program's approach, where questioning procedures or raising safety concerns was seen as weakness. The new philosophy recognized that effective operators needed to think independently and speak up when they saw problems. As the candidates prepared their equipment, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The EOD specialist, who'd arrived at Point Mugu with worn gear and uncertain prospects, had become one of the most influential figures in modern SEAL training. Her innovations had spread beyond Point Mugu to other special operations programs throughout the military. The systematic approach to risk assessment, the emphasis on equipment reliability, and the integration of safety consciousness with operational effectiveness were being adopted by elite units worldwide. "Ma'am," Petty Officer Johnson approached, with a question about dive safety protocols. "The old-timers at my previous unit said SEAL training used to be harder. Are we making it too easy? Maria considered the question carefully. It was a criticism she'd heard from some traditionalists who believed that reducing unnecessary risks somehow weakened the program. Johnson, let me ask you something. Is it harder to complete a mission when your equipment works reliably, or when it fails at critical moments? When it fails, ma'am, you have to adapt and overcome. Exactly. And is it harder to lead a team that trusts your judgment, or one that questions your decisions because you've made poor choices in training? Johnson nodded thoughtfully. One that questions your judgment, ma'am. The old program confused artificial difficulty with genuine challenge, Maria explained. Making candidates overcome equipment failures and poor safety protocols doesn't prepare them for combat. It teaches them to accept substandard conditions as normal. Real combat is hard enough without adding unnecessary problems. Admiral Hayes appeared at the dock, making one of her regular visits to observe the transformed program. Over the past 6 months, she'd become one of Maria's strongest supporters, advocating for the new training philosophy at the Pentagon and congressional levels. Instructor Vasquez, Admiral Hayes said, approaching with a familiar folder. I have news about the program expansion. Maria accepted the folder, finding official orders to establish similar training programs at 2 additional Navy installations. Her systematic approach to SEAL development was being scaled across the entire Special Operations community. Ma'am, this is incredible. But who's going to run the expanded programs? Admiral Hayes smiled. That's being worked out at levels above my authority. But I suspect you'll be offered choices about your future that most SEALs never get. As the day's training exercises began, Maria watched Derek lead a team of candidates through complex rescue scenarios. His leadership style had evolved to incorporate the lessons learned during Admiral Kane's rescue: systematic planning, clear communication, and genuine concern for team welfare over personal glory. Lieutenant Chen's team was demonstrating the kind of adaptive problem-solving that the new program was designed to develop. When their primary communications system experienced a simulated failure, they smoothly transitioned to backup protocols without losing mission effectiveness. Most importantly, Petty Officer Johnson had stopped his team's evolution when he noticed a potential safety issue with their diving equipment. Instead of being criticized for disrupting the exercise, he was commended for professional judgment and attention to detail. Outstanding work, Johnson, Maria called out. That's exactly the kind of independent thinking that keeps operators alive in the field. As the sun set over the Pacific, Maria found herself standing in the same spot where she'd first been dismissed as too slow and too cautious for SEAL operations. The irony wasn't lost on her. The qualities that had once been seen as weaknesses were now the foundation of the program's new approach. Derek joined her at the water's edge, both of them watching the candidates secure their equipment with the methodical precision that had become the program's trademark. Hard to believe how much has changed, Derek said quietly. 6 months ago, I thought you were everything wrong with modern military training. Turns out you were everything right with it. Maria nodded, thinking about the journey that had brought them both to this point. We all had to learn that being tough enough to overcome problems isn't the same as being smart enough to prevent them. And that sometimes the person everyone writes off is exactly the person everyone needs, Derek added. As they walked back toward the base, Maria reflected on the lesson that had defined her entire experience at Point Mugu. The woman who'd been dismissed as too old, too cautious, and too focused on safety had proven that sometimes the most important victories come not from overcoming obstacles, but from removing them entirely. The rescue of Admiral Kane had been just the beginning. The real victory was the knowledge that future generations of SEALs would be better prepared, better equipped, and better led because someone had been willing to challenge the system when it needed to change. Sometimes the shot that saves a life isn't fired from a rifle. It's the decision to speak up when everyone else stays silent, to think systematically when others act impulsively, and to remember that true strength lies not in individual toughness, but in the wisdom to know when caution serves courage better than recklessness. Maria Vasquez had learned that lesson the hard way. Now it was her job to make sure others wouldn't have to. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.